I'm starting a recording. The idea behind that is that in the unlikely event that you actually want to go through this all again, or even part of it, we send you a link later on this evening which allows you to actually watch a video recording of the whole thing. So there may be specific aspects that you just want to replay, just to be clear about some aspect of it. So what we're going to be doing is looking at this scenario, and it's pretty straightforward. It's a wedding, and the venue, which is a Big Country House Hotel, is going to be used exclusively by the wedding, and we've been asked to take some photos and videos of the event prior to everybody going into the reception. The client has specifically asked for 2 shots, which is the first is a shot from the north looking at all the guests gathered in the courtyard, and the second shot is the south of the house with a river in the foreground of the shot. There's going to be about 100 people at the event, and we've got full cooperation of the hotel manager, so that's all squared away. So with that in mind, guys, what's the first thing that we would look at? What's the first application? In fact, probably even when you got the client on the telephone the first time, what would you go to as you're sat at your desk, you've taken this call, and they're asking you to do this job. So what would you look at first, do you think?
Google Maps, I would look at.
Google Maps, okay. And I'd agree with that 100%. It's dead easy. It's a bit of a no-brainer, frankly, Google Maps. So we go into Google Maps, and all that I've done on Google Maps, I'm sure you're familiar with, I've typed in that postcode. It actually takes you a bit in the middle of nowhere, the postcode, which sometimes is the case. So you may have to hunt around a little bit. If the place is remote, you may end up not really being able to use a postcode. You might actually need to get OS coordinates, or maybe a latitude and longitude, which you can still put into Google Maps, but it's a little bit finicky about the format. So it might take a bit of juggling, but most of the time a postcode will get you pretty close to where you want to be. And this is it, Danesfield House Hotel and Spa. If I switch off the satellite view, one of the things that you want to get a little bit of a grip on is whereabouts is this place relative to nearby towns and that type of thing, because you're going to need, depending on what tool you're using, but I'll be using SkyDemon Lite for the purposes of this evening's session. You can't put a postcode into SkyDemon Lite, so you've got to have a good idea of approximately where is this location relative to other towns. And what we've got is nearby, we've got Marlow, Maidenhead's quite a big town, and High Wycombe up there, and Reading. So it's on a bit of a triangle between Maidenhead, High Wycombe. So if I scroll back in, switch back to satellite, and we'll take a quick look at the hotel. I'll keep scrolling in here. Okay, so what we have is the courtyard here. We'll look at airspace in just a minute, but we've got the client on the telephone, imagine, and they're describing a courtyard at the entrance to the hotel, and you can see where that is. You can see there's a car park, road access down a little lane here. There's lots of green space. So does anything leap out to you guys just looking at that first time because probably most of you have looked at this on Google Maps already. Any initial thoughts on the feasibility of this job?
Sorry, my initial immediate observation was that there is a helipad on site, and
Yeah, well spotted. Okay. Yeah.
that could lead me to believe that is it controlled airspace? Because
Well,
there's
we'll take a look at that, but yeah, it's certainly. I mean, you do well to spot that. I mean, it's actually pretty clear on this map. So, but it's often not. But yes, there is a helipad there. Uh, so let's worry about whether it's controlled airspace or not later on. But given that there's a helipad there, what is the first thing that you'd need to do once you know the date of this event? How would you deal with the fact that there's a helipad there?
I'd check with the hotel manager to make sure that no flights were planned or what the times were, that if there was anything incoming.
Yeah, spot on, Andy. Yeah, that's exactly right. Helicopters just can't just turn up and unannounced and land at helipad. They have to have permission to do that from the hotel, and the hotel will have some sort of register of people that have booked in to arrive at the hotel by helicopter. So yeah, you're going to want to talk initially to the hotel management, find out whether there are any movements booked that day, and on the day of the event you ought to revisit that. Go and have a chat with whoever manages that list, find out whether there's been any updates. Are there any arrivals or departures scheduled for during the course of the day, or at least in the time that you expect to be operating? And make sure that they understand that should somebody call up and want to make a booking, that they come and tell you about it. Okay, that you're not surprised by it. So you've got to kind of just join the dots up with that and make sure that you're fully in the loop as far as helicopter movements are concerned.
I, by virtue of my full-time job, I wouldn't trust the very last statement on there, where it says the event organizer has agreed with the hotel management that it's okay to fly drones. I would want to speak to the manager directly myself.
Yes, I agree.
As you've said, because of the helipad, but also because what I've observed being to the right and the north of it, to the east and north of that hotel.
Yep. I'm sorry, Les, what did you say is to the east and north?
The SAS base.
Okay, right. It's not SAS as in Special Air Services.
Well, that's why I would want to speak to the manager, because I'd want to know whether in flight am I going to get shot down.
Okay, yeah, it's actually SAS is a software company, so yeah, it's benign, but it's perfectly reasonable to pick that up, and it is close by. And absolutely, yes, you'd want not just to rely on the event manager. That's really a dangerous path to follow. You want to talk to the hotel manager in this sort of situation, or the building manager, or whatever it is. Find somebody that actually has true responsibility and stewardship of the site or the building, and make sure that you've got a direct connection to them, because event management people quite often make assumptions about things. So you really do want to be talking to the right people. The other thing about in this type of situation is that you may well, and you probably would in this instance, want to borrow some people from the manager. Yeah, if they've got some staff that they can let you have for a short period of time to help make sure that you can do what you need to do and do it safely without causing their guests a problem, then that's something that needs to be addressed well ahead of time. And that type of situation quite often arises, things like construction sites and so on. You may need simply to borrow some bodies for a short while to help you out, to control the area, to stop people coming in or out, whatever it is that you feel you need to do. So yeah, you're right about that in that case, Les, for sure. As far as the control is concerned, can you see any obvious hazards or issues around operating on this site other than the helipad?
Well, I've got something wrote down, but shall I let somebody else have a go?
Okay.
Oh, I can answer.
Wedding guest.
Okay, right. I'll have to make a decision. Dion, you go ahead. What?
Well, firstly, I'd say it's going to be difficult to control 100 wedding guests.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure whether you'd be able to get them in your control. You've also got the road, I suppose, coming in and out.
Where do you think, Dion, looking at this, and let's just talk about the northern shot to start off with, where do you think you would be able to actually operate from? You know, so you've got to take a shot of this area here. All the guests are going to be on this courtyard. That's the idea.
Given that perhaps you're not going to be able to get them in your control, you need to be 50 meters away from that. So I don't know, perhaps somewhere off to the right-hand side here, away from the road in.
Yeah.
Is that part of the back of the car park?
Okay, so here somewhere maybe?
Yeah, or further over maybe.
Okay. Now, this was actually a real job that I helped out. A friend of mine who's an operator asked me to come along and do some camera operating for him. So you know, I've been to the site. I do know. I know the layout. You know, having gone through that process, and we actually ended up parking in this car park here and operating from this field. So we literally put his van with a back up against the grass and unloaded everything and just plonked it all on the grass here, and we operated from roundabout. We actually took off from roundabout the middle of this strip here. The issue that you have with actually a wedding specifically is exactly as you said, Dion, the controlling of the guests. It's actually incredibly difficult to get control, particularly of that number of people at a wedding, in part because when do you have the opportunity to talk to all of those people, to brief them? Realistically, in most situations, wedding situations, the earliest opportunity is going to be at the reception when everybody's sat down and somewhat paying attention. But of course, the photography and that type of thing generally happens before the reception. The other problem is that there's going to be alcohol involved, and quite often a lot of the guests are going to be pretty well oiled. So I mean, I've never done wedding photography, but other than actually being involved with this job, but it seems to me from talking to wedding photographers that for the most part they assume that they're not going to be able to control the guests to any great extent, so they plan around not having control. And if they are able to get control, then that's a bonus. But you know, for the most part, they plan that they don't. Now, given that let's assume that we don't have control of the guests here, and we're setting up and operating here, how far away from this are we going to need to be in order to, you know, be legal? How far away from the guests are we going to have to be?
50 meters.
Yeah, 50 meters. Now, there is a really useful tool. Some of you will know about this, but there's an amazingly useful tool on Google Maps that allows you to measure distance. So you right-click at one of the points, so just on the edge of the courtyard, you select measure distance, and then you left-click again at another location. Okay, and you can then drag this around. So we can see that the edge of that courtyard is round about the middle of the car park, that's 50 meters away from the edge of that courtyard. Yeah, and you can drag this, yeah, any old way. So if we were operating, let's say we were operating from here, we could then drag this around and see, well, okay, how far away is that from the road? Okay, it's pretty tight on that road, so we've got potential if vehicles come down here that we have an issue. We're a long way away from that main road over there, and so on. Okay, so this is a very, very useful tool to be able to measure distance. And I strongly recommend that when you're doing your pre-site preparation for a job, you actually take some screenshots with measures, like this in place, to be able to demonstrate that you've been thinking about distances and separation. Okay, it's pretty straightforward thing to do. So with that in mind, and let's say that we're going to operate from this field. We're 50 meters away from the courtyard, so that's okay. And in fact, if we climb with the bubble rule, if we climbed up reasonably high, we could actually encroach a bit closer than 50 meters, as long as we're 50 meters, in a straight line from the aircraft to the people, we're okay. But what do we, what is there an issue there where we're operating? In fact, you mentioned it, I think, Dion, earlier on. What do we need to have control of if we're going to be flying around this kind of area here?
The car park.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a problem for us, isn't it? The car park, because the road access road is down here. People will turn up into this lane and then they park, and they would normally then walk to the hotel down this little pathway here. So what could we do in order to gain control of that car park for the period that we're flying?
You could divert them round the other way. You could have a footfall round the other way. Sorry, I don't think down that way. Yeah,
down this way. Yeah,
and then I'm guessing to the left and bring them in that way.
Yeah.
So you could cordon off some of the car park to prevent people encroaching upon you.
That's exactly.
The other
Sorry,
problem
go on, Ed.
I can see is the other side of the car park, which obviously I can't map with the mouse. There's a footpath that I don't know whether it leads into the forest or does it lead to that property.
This one here.
That one there.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It just goes round to it's part of the hotel, so it actually goes round to the hotel. But there is actually, and you can't really see it on this map, there is some sort of footpath through these woods as well, that's used by dog walkers occasionally. But as I say, you can't pick it out from this map, so you probably wouldn't notice it until you got there.
Well, me looking at it, I would need a couple of cordons, but I would certainly need a couple of sentries, wouldn't I? Just to say, anybody comes up that path, just ask them, give us 5 minutes or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's exactly right. So what we ended up doing, and there's always a choice with this. There's more than one way of doing it, and one of the considerations, particularly at something like this, an event like this, is you don't want to upset people. You want to try and avoid creating a situation where you're annoying people or upsetting them. So what you could do is have somebody located here. Actually stopping people from coming into the car park whilst you're in the air, but you're likely to annoy people if you do that. So a softer approach, if you can find it, is usually better. And what we ended up doing was we borrowed a couple of people from the hotel, and we had initially in the build up to the event, they coned off some spaces in this part of the car park so that people didn't use them. We then, when we started operating, we had somebody located just here, and as cars came up, they were stopping them. They were getting them to park here, explaining what went on, and getting them to walk exactly as you said, Les, getting that rather than walk through the car park and down here, they were asking them to please go back down this pathway and come into the hotel this way. So really easy. It worked perfectly well. We were only actually operating here about 20 minutes anyway, So we didn't annoy anybody. It really just simply wasn't an issue. But you would, in this scenario, you would need to be getting control of that car park somehow or other. Yeah, and it might depend a little bit on how much resource you're able to use. You know, whether you've got people that you can deploy. Signage may help in situations like this, but the essence of this, and this is really the message I'm getting across, is even sat at your desk with the client on the telephone, you can be thinking about, okay, what am I going to need to control? What are my options perhaps? You might think to ask the client, you know, do you think I'm going to be able to, you know, get some help, one or two people to help out, you know, maybe ushers or somebody from the hotel. You get the idea. Yeah, it's just kind of thinking about it from a pragmatic point of view as to how you can approach it. So let's, at this stage, and we'll come on to that southerly shot in just a second, but let's just have a little look around at some of the other things that we'd look at pretty quickly. So Sky Demon is, to my mind, perhaps the most useful single tool, but it is a little bit problematic technically. I don't know whether, have you been able to get Sky Demon installed and working?
I've got it, and I'm quite pretty IT savvy, but I think it's a bit of a hard tool to learn. I much prefer personally myself the NATS.
Yeah, the drone assist.
Yeah, which I find is very easy to use.
It is. Yeah,
all the NOTAMs up to date, but it certainly identifies any hazards like local airports and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think it's a question of finding something that works for you. And a Sky Demon is difficult to get running on some, but it won't run on Chrome browser, on the Chrome browser. You probably see up here I'm actually running an Internet Explorer emulator on Chrome, which is pretty much the only way you'll get it running on Chrome.
It won't run on Mac Safari either.
Safari, no, it kind of comes and goes. It will run on Internet Explorer pretty consistently if you use that, so that's okay. There is an app that you can download onto a tablet, on an iOS tablet, which works okay. I don't think there's anything that will run on an Android tablet. The phone version, well, apart from the fact that it's really too small to make any sense of, it's actually more of a planning tool than you know, looking at maps. So if you can't get Sky Demon to play, or you don't like it, then try things like Drone Assist or Sky Angels. They're all actually uses the same database. One of the insurance companies, CoverDrone, actually has their own version of the same system. So yeah, that will give you the information you need. But one way or another, you've got to be able to understand what the airspace is at the location you're going to be operating, just to make sure that there's no issues that might prevent you from flying altogether, which is really unusual for that to happen.
I'm not sure if any other delegates have used the Drone Assist, but it is, you can put the postcode in.
Yes, you can. It has the big advantage of being able to put a postcode in. What it doesn't do, though, is show controlled airspace in quite the same way. You know, this the thing I like about Sky Demon is it shows you controlled airspace in the same way that an aviation map shows you controlled airspace. So it's pretty easy, if you can get it to work, to you know, to understand. Now, there's nothing to say that you actually shouldn't use more than one tool. You know, there's absolutely no reason why you can't use Sky Demon and Drone Assist. In fact, there's some good arguments that, you know, that would suggest that's a good idea. So with Sky Demon, you've got to, you know, because you can't put a postcode in, you've got to find the location. And we decided, didn't we, that if we take Maidenhead, and High Wycombe, it's on pretty much a triangle. And in fact, on Skye Demon, because Danesfield House has a heliport, it's actually on Skye Demon, which you wouldn't normally expect a hotel to be shown on Skye Demon, but it's here. With Skye Demon, you can roll over any feature. You should be able to roll over any feature. Why is that not working? Oh, there we go. And it will pop out information about it. So, it's quite handy. There's a heliport there, just tells you what the elevation is. We can also see that it is, can you see the London TMA?
Yeah, it's controlled.
So Danesfield House is underneath the London TMA. Yeah, you see that the TMA starts at 2,500 feet and goes up to flight level 195, which is more or less 19,500 feet. So you're not in controlled airspace, you're actually underneath controlled airspace operating at Danesfield House. The controlled airspace doesn't start until 2,500 feet. Okay. If we were to be working here, where the cursor is, you can see that actually the controlled airspace runs from the surface. So it's the London CTR, which runs from the surface up to 2,500 feet. So that would be controlled airspace. Does that mean we can't operate there?
That means you can, I don't think that, I personally believe that means you can't operate without ATC.
Yeah. Okay.
You'd have to inform if you felt that there was a danger to
that
your aircraft, to the or your operation to the actual aircraft that's planned. I believe.
That's exactly right, Graham. You're perfectly entitled to fly in that controlled airspace. Yeah, there is nothing in the regulations at all that says you can't fly.
Can I just clarify that with you, Andrew? Even though it says that controlled space is from the surface, you're still allowed to fly.
You are. Yeah. Now you do. What Graham says is absolutely right. You've got to use your judgment about whether, where you're flying, frankly, irrespective of whether it's controlled airspace or not, but does the place where you're flying and the profile of the operation that you're going to be flying. So maybe it's a high level survey. You might be flying at 350 to 400 feet for extended periods of time. You've got to make a judgment about whether that could impact manned aviation operations, but there is nothing in the regulations that says you can't fly in controlled airspace. Okay, now what there is though is these new flight restriction zones around airports. So you've got to be paying attention to those, and we'll be looking at those in just a second. But for the minute, let's just return to Danesfield House. We've established that it's not controlled airspace, which means that it's Class G airspace. So it's uncontrolled airspace. There is a heliport there. There's actually another helipad at a pub called Black Boys, which is not that far away. It's on the south side of the river. So that is a consideration, but it's a little bit of a distance away. And what else do we have? Well, we've got two airfields. We've got Wycombe Air Park, which is an ATZ, and we have an airport, which is an airfield, which is just outside Maidenhead, called White Waltham, which also has an ATZ. So that we know, because these have got ATZs, that there will be flight restriction zones for those airfields. So we definitely need to check the flight restriction zones to see whether they impact our operation. Is there anything else that anybody thought about with respect to airspace and the type of aviation activity that we might be seeing in that location? Does anybody give any other thoughts to, or have any other thoughts on it?
One query was, does Sky Demon, does that include the military fly-in as well?
Yeah, it does. Yes.
It does.
Yeah, military airfields are shown. And in fact, Alan, there's one not very far away, which is this one here, Benson. Yeah. And you can almost always you can pick out military airfields because they have these what are called stubs, which actually look a little bit like these new FRZs, don't they? So they're designed to do exactly the same thing, give some protection to traffic coming in and out of that airport, particularly fast jets that tend to have quite a low, shallow approach into airfields. So military aerodrome traffic zones have a very distinctive shape with these studs, and there is an ATZ. Yeah, so that you can see the ATZ, same dimensions as a normal civil one, but they have this additional protection outside of the ATZ that goes out to 5 nautical miles, and the stubs. Now, if you're operating and there is a military airfield, even I would say 20 miles away, it would be sensible to take a look at to try and find out what operates out of that airfield, because you might see whatever it is whilst you're operating. Does anybody happen to know what operates out of Benson?
Stealth bomber?
I'm sorry, I missed that. Who said that?
Did you ask what flew out of Benson?
Yeah, what aircraft operate out of Benson? Does anybody happen to know, or have anybody done some research?
Stealth bomber? Is it the stealth bomber?
No, 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 it's not. It's actually helicopters, and guys, just go on to Google and do a quick search. So RAF Benson. Take a look, see what it comes up with. Usually it just tells you, so it's a helicopter, main operating base, working with Joint Helicopter Command, home to 2 frontline Puma helicopter squadrons. And they mentioned Chinooks as well. It is a really busy military helicopter airfield. There's a lot of activity there. Tends to be less at weekends, so that helps us a little bit for the purposes of this exercise. We're less likely on a Saturday to see helicopters from Benson, but it doesn't mean that it's impossible. They do still operate at weekends. So there isn't anything in particular that you need to worry about. It's far enough away that it's we're well away from any zones that it might have, but we want to keep in mind that we may well see or hear military helicopters. The other thing that you want to have is a telephone number for Benson ATZ. Just find out what it is and have it written down on one of your forms, probably your on-site assessment form. Have it on there, just in case you need to contact them. Because if you have a problem here, one or two things could happen that you'd worry about. The first clearly is that your aircraft starts flying off towards Heathrow. So you ought really to have Heathrow's ATC number. The other thing is, if it goes in the opposite direction, if it starts going towards Benson, have their number as well. You just want to be equipped with telephone numbers for air traffic, just in case you have an emergency. That's pretty much all that we need to say about the airspace. There's no issues with airspace. It's not in controlled airspace. You're underneath the London TMA. There are airfields around. It's going to be busy. That you will be seeing light aircraft, possibly military helicopters, possibly civil helicopters, but there's nothing untoward about it at all. One thing that I will mention, though, simply because we've got it up here, can you see this little line that goes along here. This is, if I roll the cursor over it, it marks out the Oxford Area of Intense Aerial Activity. It's called an AIAA, and if I move the map, you'll see, it might struggle a little bit with this because it's going to have to load this up, but you can see the extent of it, and it takes in Brize Norton, Fairford, Oxford Kidlington, which is a very busy training airfield, Benson, and a few other bits and pieces. But if you're flying a manned aircraft, you would be mad to fly around inside an AIAA without talking to somebody, in this case it would be either Benson or Brize. It really doesn't have any implications for you operating a small unmanned aircraft, other than if you're in an AIAA, you're likely to see a lot of manned aircraft flying around, especially during the week, because they're always associated really with military activity. So just look out for the AIAA. And I've got to tell you that if you end up doing your flight assessment in Oxfordshire, you will be in that AIAA, and your examiner will expect you to know that it's an AIAA. Okay, so those of you that think you might be doing your assessment in Oxfordshire, try and remember that. Any of you got any questions on airspace at all? No, everybody happy?
I don't think so.
Okay. Let's go back. There's one other thing we've not looked at: the flight restriction zones. If you want an easy way of finding out whether you're in a flight restriction zone, NATS have very kindly, as part of the DroneSafe website, they have created a Google overlay with FRZs. And if you go to DroneSafe, it's under airfield restrictions, so that's what this page is. And if you just click on this view larger map, it takes you to this, and I've moved, I zoomed in to bring in this area, and you can see what these FRZs look like. White Waltham's got 3 main runways, Wickham has 2, and if we zoom in, actually I'm not sure that we can zoom in anymore. Yeah, that's ISP, here we go. We are just outside of the FRZ for Wickham. Okay, so we're just north of the river, I think somewhere around here. So we're not in an FRZ, which means that we do not have to have permission to operate. Had we been in an FRZ, we would have to have got permission from that airfield beforehand to operate. Okay, is everybody clear on these new regulations, the FRZs? I think actually, even though frankly it's a bit of a pain, because your chances of needing to operate in an FRZ at some point are fairly high. It is crystal clear. If you're in an FRZ, you need to operate, you've got to get permission from the airfield to do that, from ATC. From the smaller ones, there'll be flight information service units. So people like Wickham and White Waltham, they will be FISUs, FISU, flight information service units. Somebody like Benson, it will be ATC. So, crystal clear. If you're in an FRZ, you've got to get permission before you operate. Any questions on the FRZs and so on? Are you all happy with that?
Just a quick question about the permissions.
Yeah.
Are they quite accommodating?
Generally speaking, I would say yes, they are, Dion, particularly the smaller airfields. It does seem to me that based on conversations that I can see going on, some of the larger airports are insisting on operators going through NATS to get permission. There's something called an exceptional flight clearance. It's online form, part of the NATS website. It looks as though some of them are insisting on that process being followed, and there's a lead time for that. It's 21 days. Now, there are a lot of people kicking up about that, and I think the CAA are probably going to get involved because I'm sure that wasn't really their intention. So I think we're going to have to see how these new regulations and that requirement to get permission, how that pans out. It wouldn't at all surprise me if the regulations end up changing again at some point, but smaller airfields, it really shouldn't be a problem. Just call them up, let them know what you're doing, that you're a permission holder, you're going to be operating, or you would like to operate in this location, which is in their FRZ. It's usually helpful for them to know if there's not an obvious local landmark. The most useful thing is for you to tell them how far away and the compass bearing. So even if it's just an approximate one, so we're going to be 1.5 miles to the northwest of your airfield, and we intend to be operating up to a height of whatever the height is, and then give them some indication of the period. And I would be very surprised if you have any problems with that. They're usually very accommodating. It seems to be the large airfields, so we're talking Heathrow, Gatwick, Southampton, the regional airports really, where they're making life a little bit difficult. I think, frankly, they probably simply don't have the resources for lots of applications to fly in their airspace. So they're using this NATS process to insulate themselves from it a little bit, and I guess to put people off enough that it's only going to be serious operators that will be prepared to go through that process. Okay.
Yeah. Thanks.
Okay. Let's get back to Danesfield House, and let's talk a little bit about the two shots. The northern shot, frankly, is very straightforward. There's no, other than the car park, which you've got to get control of, there's no particular issues with that. What about that southern shot where they want a shot of this area, this part of the hotel from the south with the river in the foreground? Has anybody got any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I didn't think it would be possible to fly the drone over the river. There might be boats, and I wasn't sure about the land ownership on the other side, and the trees.
Okay, yeah, that's good. Anybody else got any thoughts?
My first thought was based on the angle of it, and depending on the drone, depending on the lens, how wide it's going to be to get the river in the front, you're likely to be hovering somewhere above the Hurley Riverside Park. So it would be to get in touch with them to find out whether it's possible to fly over there. They might have campers there, so it might not be possible, or there looks like a farmer's field in between the river and the park. Yeah, so finding out who, gauging how high the trees are to find out how high you'd need to fly really. There looks like a boating lake, a boating kind of establishment directly kind of underneath.
Is this what you mean?
I mean, in terms of boat traffic, I wouldn't be overly concerned. I'd just make sure that same with roads, you cross it when there's no traffic. But I'd be looking at permission from either the landowner of whoever owns that field or the campsite.
Okay, where would you think about actually operating from? Where would you set up to take off and land? Do you think?
Possibly the boating establishment, because if you were on Danesfield House, you'd be obscured by trees. So you'd have line of sight from there, or I guess crossing the river and operating from where, if you can get permission to operate from the farmer's field or from the campsite, maybe operate from there.
Okay, yeah, all that's really good. Thanks everybody. This is a problematic shot, and it's frankly, it's the sort of thing that you will sometimes be asked to do. And my reaction, if somebody was to ask me to do this, is to actually try and dissuade them from doing the shot, because frankly, I don't think it's going to work unless they've got a really good reason for needing a shot from the other side of the river. You know, even excluding the sort of points that Andy raised about the trees and so on, with the sort of lenses that you carry on these aircraft, the hotel is just going to be a speck in the distance. It just kind of doesn't make any sense. I think what I would do initially would be to try and persuade them maybe to get a shot from here looking over the formal gardens, and yeah, that's going to work a lot better, frankly. But let's assume that there's a good reason why they want that shot, and so that we've got to deliver it if it's possible. All the points that you guys made are absolutely right. We've got trees in the way. Operating from really anywhere in the hotel grounds is going to be difficult. And in fact, this is an instance where if you, as you should really take a look at the OS maps, you'll see that the ground rises here from the river. Danesfield House is actually on a little bit of a ridge. It's not massive, but it just compounds the problem of line of sight. And that's really what you're talking about. If you're operating from here, flying out over the river to this side, well, if we look at distances for a start, it's roughly, you know, depending on where you actually set up from, let's say we set up here, yeah, it's 250 meters, which is, you know, it's kind of doable, but you're going to be on the edge of visual line of sight with pretty much any aircraft that I suspect you guys are operating. Is everybody operating, you know, in the sort of Phantom, Inspire, Mavic type thing? Anybody operating anything larger than that?
No, I've got Phantom 4. So.
Okay, so yeah, Phantom 4, and you know, Mavic, I think you're going to really struggle to see that far away, because it's going to have to be high to be in visual line of sight anyway, and to get a shot of the hotel from those trees. So it's pretty problematic. Andy, you're absolutely right. I think if I was needing to do that, I'd be trying to get in touch with this boating club. I think it's a rowing club actually here, and seeing whether I could use their car park. If we zoom in a little bit, you can see they've got a car park there. I mean, the problem is likely to be that on a weekend, it's likely to be quite busy there. So that may not be as straightforward as it might seem. But it's certainly worth checking it out. The other possibility is, as you say, actually move to the other side of the river. But logistically, that's painful. I think the nearest bridge is about 5 miles away. You're going to be off-site, having to, you know, find out who owns this land to be able to operate there. You know, it's a pain. So I would say the best option is probably if you can persuade these people to operate from there, a quick hop across the river. Again, checking distances, you're actually far enough away, as long as you don't get, you know, much beyond the middle of this field, you're far enough away. And in fact, if you moved over here, you know, you've got a little bit more latitude to be able to keep clear of these you know, mobile homes and the camping activity that goes on there. Okay, now the other thing that is worth mentioning is Street View and the pictures. You know, sometimes you get a proper Street View, other times you may just get pictures, but it's worth just taking a quick look with Street View. to see what it looks like from the ground. You can get some idea of the height of trees. We can see here that the ground actually rises. It's not just trees. The ground rises away from the river on the other side of the bank. That's the rowing club there. It's a very useful tool, Street View. You can quite often get a view of the site that you want to operate, and you very often can pick up hazards that you might struggle to see just on a straight satellite view. Things like electricity pylons, other physical hazards can be difficult to pick out from a satellite view. Sometimes you can see the shadows cast by things like that, but often you can't. So consider that as an option. There we go. Any other thoughts about that southern shot? Crossing the river, can't remember, I think it was probably you, Andy, that said, yeah, don't worry too much about vessels, just treat it as a road, try not to overfly vessels, but that's really not a problem. In any event, you're going to be over 50 meters by the time you cross that river anyway, in all probability, so that's not particularly an issue for you. Okay. Any more thoughts on that? Okay, right. So what we've done is we've looked at the physical layout of the site, and as I say, you can generally do this when you've actually got the client on the telephone. Pretty early in the process. Having some thoughts about where you could set up, which areas you need to control, what the distances are, try and record those. As I say, screenshots with that distance measuring tool is really useful to back up your overall plan and to demonstrate that you've been thinking about distances and control. We've talked about liaising with whoever has responsibility for that site, possibly the property owner, management, site manager, whoever it is. It will vary from job to job, but you do need to find out who has authority, if you like, over that site, and have a conversation with them and explain what you're doing. If you need some help from them, ask for it. And sometimes the event management will have that relationship already, but as Les mentioned earlier on, don't rely on event management. They can make assumptions and get things wrong. Okay, I did a job at Silverstone Racecourse where I was absolutely assured by the people actually running the race at Silverstone that I could operate there. When I actually turned up, Silverstone, the people that actually own Silverstone, thought otherwise, and I ended up being very, very limited in what I could do there, because I had taken it at face value that it had all been squared away, and it clearly hadn't. So just be a little bit cautious about that. Do look at OS maps as well. Certainly anywhere that's rural like this, OS maps will allow you to pick up footpaths, public rights of way, national trails, that type of thing. Very useful to know that. And also, had we looked at an OS map, you'd have seen that there's so this is rising ground here. It's easy to pick up from an OS map looking at the contours. So try and include that in your toolkit of usually web-based tools that you use to research the site, because that's really what this is about, is having a location and finding out as much as you possibly can about the location in order to initially decide whether the job is possible, and assuming that it is possible, okay, what are going to be the challenges there. And you end up initially completing one of these or something like it. Anyway, this is our standard pre-site assessment form. It's really a checklist. So these are the things to consider when you're, kind of doing your desk-based research for the site. Okay, and just make some really simple notes. You can see none of these are terribly detailed. If there is something that is a problem, like let's say it was within an FRZ, then you'd need some backup notes for it. Okay, so it's not complicated, this, and you will find your own way of doing it, and you'll probably stumble across some extra tools. Things like I know some operators use there's a database, I can't remember the website now, but there's a database of mobile transmission masts, and they check to see whether operating is going to be close to a mobile mast. It's probably worth doing. I'd never really had any issues with being close to a mobile mast, but he's got a thing about it, and that's absolutely fine. So build your own toolkit. It almost certainly is going to include Google Maps with the satellite view, but OS Maps, whichever way of checking airspace is best for you. NOTAMs, well, SkyDemon allows you to pick up NOTAMs. Really simple with SkyDemon. You have to create a route. So what you do to create a route is click on an airfield, then click on another airfield. It creates a route and then pops up NOTAMs in the top right hand side, which highlights any NOTAMs that might be affecting that route, and quite a lot that don't. So there's always going to be things that can't be filtered out, like warnings about overflying Libya and Korea and that type of thing. But if you just page down through these, you'll see if there's something that could affect you. And these little binoculars here, can you I don't know whether you can see that popping out on the map there, just to the north of White Waltham. There's a little animation here. So if it's possible for a NOTAM to be highlighted, if you click on the binoculars, if you're not sure where it is, it will highlight it. So things like during the summer, the red arrows normally NOTAM their routing between air shows, and they typically transit quite low level, but the routing is expressed as a series of latitude and longitude coordinates. So you're not really going to be able to tell what that is. But if you click on the little pair of binoculars, it actually shows you what the route is. So you can see the actual route and the timings, the estimated timings of the transit as well. So yeah, this is it's quite a useful tool. But there are other ways of getting at NOTAM. There's a website called NOTAM Info. Let me just quick look. NOTAMinfo.com. And it's not as easy to use, but it gives you, if I can just get back to the UK. Gosh, trying really hard to zoom into this. It's a little bit jittery, but you get the idea. And you can see individual NOTAMs for an area. So if we put our cursor over this number 2 here, that's the obstacle erected. So it's the same as this NOTAM here. Okay, so where has it gone? I've lost it. Here we go. So NOTAMs frankly, there's not really much point in checking NOTAMs until you get to, probably a week or so before the job, and definitely check them the evening before the job. They're on a 24-hour cycle. So, do please check NOTAMs. It is a legal responsibility for pilots to check NOTAMs. I've got to say, you're going to be really, really unlucky to have a NOTAM that materially affects your ability to do the job. They're very, very unusual, but you don't want to get embarrassed by operating when possibly there's some type of air restriction, temporary air restriction in an area that you are blissfully unaware of. So use whichever tool works best for you to check NOTAMs out, and probably start checking them about a week before the scheduled time of the job. Okay, Alan, are you all right with that? Okay. Now, that's pretty much it, guys, in terms of working through this. What I would suggest you do is go through this process 3 or 4 times. There's the other scenario which you can use, the Charlton Park scenario, where you might want to have a go at that if you haven't already. But pick a few places that that you're familiar with, and some that you're not familiar with. Print yourself off a blank pre-site assessment form and go through this process. Get yourself a little bit of a toolkit together. And certainly I did this. I just had a bookmark on my browser with the tools that I use and just work through them. Now, you may end up needing to subscribe to things like OS Maps if you haven't got easy access to OS Maps already. You can get them online relatively cheaply. Not absolutely essential, but you never really know. If you look at an OS map, sometimes you pick something out that you might have missed in using any other technique. So I'd personally think that they're worthwhile, but I know for a fact there's an awful lot of operators that don't bother with OS maps unless there's a very specific reason for them needing to. So for example, in a very hilly terrain or something like that, they may want to know what the topography is. But to my mind, I think checking an OS map is sensible. And just get used to the process. I promise you that once you've been through it a few times, you can do what we've just done in 10-15 minutes easily. It doesn't take you long, and often you can actually do a lot of it whilst you've got somebody on the telephone. Almost the first question you should be asking somebody that contacts you asking for a job or making an inquiry is, well, where is it? And whilst you've got them on the telephone, stick the postcode in, try and find where it is so that you're actually looking at it, and you've got an opportunity maybe to ask them questions whilst they're on the telephone the first time. Usually clients will either live or work at the location they're asking, or at least they'll be familiar with it. It's quite unusual for them not to be familiar with the location where they're asking you to do a job. So use them as a resource. Ask them questions about the site. It's always worth, particularly if they live or work there, it's always worth asking them what sort of aircraft do you see there. Are there any nearby, military airports that they know of, that type of thing. So that's it, folks. Practice it. Just go off. Have a few goes. You will be expected to go through this process when you do your pre-site assessment. So you should have completed one of these. Ideally, have a little bit of a go at a risk assessment. Make a start at doing a risk assessment as well. Your examiner will expect you to know what the airspace is. He'll expect you to know what nearby airfields are, and for you to have a telephone number for at least one nearby air traffic control unit. So go through this process, practice it a few times, and then when you book your flight assessment, do it again for that site. It's all the flight assessment sites are benign. You know, they have to be because of what we do. But yeah, they've all got little things like, you know, footpaths and you know, I mentioned that AA that's there for the Oxfordshire site. You know, so do pay attention and come along to your assessment prepared to talk about the site and what you've found out about it, and that type of thing. So has anybody got any questions at that point before we wrap it up? Okay, cool. All right, well, as I say, go off and have a bit of a go at it. Pick some places you know, some that you don't, and just, you know, get a process clear in your mind that you can repeat quickly, easily, and efficiently when you need to. Okay. Any other questions, thoughts, observations, or are we done?
I think we're done.
Okay.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you
All
very
right.
much.
My pleasure. My pleasure. See you next time, folks.
Cheers.
Thanks.
Cheers. Bye.